Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Ezra Thornfield and I've been a park ranger in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains for 18 years. I've pulled lost hikers out of ravines, tracked down missing kids, and faced down angry black bears more times than I can count. I thought I knew every secret these mountains held. I was wrong. It was late October 1967 when everything changed. The leaves were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds that brought tourists from all over the East Coast. But Death Valley Ridge, my patrol area, stayed mostly empty. Smart people avoided it. The Cherokee had warned about that place for generations, talking about empty people and stolen souls. I never paid much attention to old stories. I should have listened. Death Valley Ridge sits about 30 miles from the nearest paved road, a 15-mile stretch of the Appalachian Trail that cuts through some of the most remote wilderness in Jefferson National Forest. At 3,400 feet elevation, it's not the highest peak, but it's isolated. Deep hollows hide limestone caves and old coal mine shafts from the 1920s. The silence up there can be so complete, it makes your ears ring. I was 42 then, a widower since Sarah died in that car accident 4 years earlier. My 2 boys were living with their grandmother in Wise County while I worked. The job kept me busy, kept my mind off things. I'd grown up in these mountains, knew the old-timers and their stories. Most were harmless tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. A family from the D.C. area, the Hendersons, had been hiking the Death Valley Ridge section. They were experienced, well-equipped, and overdue by 2 days. The husband, Mark, was a geology professor. His wife, Linda, taught high school biology. Their twin daughters, both 16, were honor students and Girl Scout veterans. Not the type to get lost or make PID mistakes. I loaded my pack and headed out alone. Standard protocol was to wait for backup, but I knew those trails better than anyone. If the Hendersons were hurt or trapped somewhere, every hour mattered. The hike to their last known campsite took me 4 hours. I found their camp in a small clearing beside Sulphur Creek, and my first thought was that they'd just stepped away for a minute. The tent was still up, properly staked. Their camp stove sat on a flat rock with a pot of coffee still warm. Steam rose from 4 metal cups sitting on a log like they'd just poured it. But the silence felt wrong. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Even the creek seemed quieter than it should be. I called their names until my voice echoed off the ridge walls. Nothing. I walked the perimeter of their camp looking for signs of where they'd gone. That's when I noticed something strange about the temperature. As I moved around the campsite, I walked into patches of cold air. Not just cool, genuinely cold, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. These patches were maybe 50 yards across, perfectly circular, with normal October warmth just outside them. My compass started acting up too. The needle spun in lazy circles, never settling on north. When I tried my radio, I got nothing but static. Even my watch had stopped, the second hand frozen at 3:17. I found their footprints leading away from camp toward a limestone outcropping about a quarter-mile north. 4 sets of prints in the soft earth, 2 adults, 2 teenagers. But something about the tracks bothered me. They were too perfect, too evenly spaced, like someone walking very carefully, thinking about every step. The tracks led directly to a cave entrance I'd never noticed before, even though I'd hiked past this spot dozens of times. Dark mouth in the rock, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The footprints went right, got up to the opening, and disappeared inside. I should have waited for backup. Should have called the county sheriff. Instead, I clicked on my flashlight and followed them in. The cave went back further than my flashlight beam could reach. The walls were smooth limestone, carved by water over thousands of years. But carved into those walls, fresh as if they'd been made yesterday, were symbols I didn't recognize. geometric patterns and spirals that seemed to move in my peripheral vision. I'd gone maybe 100 yards when I heard voices echoing from deeper in the cave. Relief flooded through me. The Hendersons were alive, probably just exploring and had gotten turned around in the dark. "Hello," I called out. "This is Park Ranger Thornfield. Are you folks okay?" The voices stopped, complete silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then I heard Mark Henderson's voice clear as day. "We're fine, Ranger. Just looking at some interesting rock formations. We'll be out soon." Something about his tone bothered me. Too calm, too formal, like he was reading from a script. I kept moving deeper, following the smooth passage as it curved left and right. The air smelled wrong. Not the usual musty cave smell, but something chemical, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. 20 minutes later, I found them. The passage opened into a large chamber, maybe 30 feet across. My flashlight beam swept across the space and landed on the Henderson family. They were standing in a perfect line against the far wall, all facing me. Mark, Linda, and the two girls. Not moving, not speaking, just standing there with their hands at their sides. "Thank God," I said. "Your families are worried sick. We need to get you out of here." Mark stepped forward. Same hiking clothes he'd been wearing when they left, same beard, same glasses. But when my light hit his eyes, I felt my stomach drop. His eyes were empty, not blind, empty, like looking into deep water at night. "We're not ready to leave yet, Ranger Thornfield," he said. His voice was Mark's voice, but it came out flat and emotionless. "We're learning so much down here." Linda stepped up beside him. Same empty eyes, same flat tone. "The cave has so many secrets. We want to explore more." That's when I noticed the other people. Behind the Hendersons, deeper in the shadows, stood more figures. An old man in 1920s work clothes, a woman in a faded floral dress, a young boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing knickers and suspenders. All of them perfectly still, all with those same empty, terrible eyes. I backed toward the passage entrance, my hand moving slowly toward my service revolver. "How long have you folks been down here?" "Time moves differently in the deep places," the old man said. His voice carried a slight accent, maybe Polish or Czech, the kind of immigrant workers who'd come to mine coal in these mountains 50 years ago. "Some of us have been waiting a very long time." The woman in the floral dress tilted her head at an unnatural angle. "You look tired, Ranger. Why don't you rest with us? It's very peaceful here." I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Not running footsteps, walking, measured and patient like they knew I couldn't get away. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I stumbled through the passage, tripping over rocks I hadn't noticed on the way in. The cave seemed longer going out. Much longer. Passages branched off that I swore hadn't been there before. Several times I took what I thought was the right turn, only to find myself in dead ends or chambers I'd never seen. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw daylight ahead. I burst out of the cave entrance, gasping and shaking. The sun was setting. I'd been underground for 6 hours, though it felt like 20 minutes. Back at the Henderson camp, I found Ranger Tommy Whitehorse waiting for me. Tommy was Cherokee, about 30 years old, and one of the best trackers I'd ever met. He took one look at my face and knew something was very wrong. "What happened in there?" he asked. I told him everything. About the cold patches, the perfect footprints, the people with empty eyes. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, Tommy walked over to a large oak tree near the cave entrance. Carved into the bark, about 7 feet up, were symbols I hadn't noticed before. Fresh cuts in the wood, the sap still flowing. "Cherokee warning signs," Tommy said quietly. "My grandmother taught me these when I was little. They mark places where the Nunehai hunt." "The what?" "Spirit people. They steal human shapes, human memories. But they can't steal souls, so they walk around empty inside, wearing the faces of the dead." He traced one of the symbols with his finger. My grandmother said they collect people in places like this, deep caves where the earth is thin and other things can slip through. I looked back at the dark mouth of the cave. Those people in there, they're not the Hendersons, are they? Tommy shook his head. The Hendersons are probably dead. These things take everything: appearance, voice, memories. But they don't understand emotions. They don't know how to be human. As if to prove his point, we heard voices from inside the cave. Multiple people talking, but they were all saying the same thing in unison. Ranger Thornfield, please come back. We need your help. Ranger Thornfield, please come back. We need your help. It was my own voice. Perfect reproduction, down to my Virginia accent and the way I pronounced my name, but spoken by a dozen different mouths all at the same time. Tommy grabbed my arm. We need to get out of here. Now. We hiked back toward the main trail in darkness, using only moonlight to guide us. Tommy knew these woods as well as I did, maybe better. Neither of us spoke until we reached the ranger station, a small cabin 5 miles from Death Valley Ridge. Inside, Tommy made coffee while I tried to process what I'd seen. The logical part of my mind kept insisting there had to be a rational explanation. Gas leaks in caves could cause hallucinations. Carbon monoxide poisoning could explain the empty stares and strange behavior. But deep down, I knew better. Tell me about the Nunahai, I said. Tommy sat across from me at the small table. They're old, older than the Cherokee, older than any human settlement in these mountains. My grandmother said they came from a place between places, hunting for vessels they could wear. Vessels? Human bodies. The spirits need them to exist in our world. But taking a body is only half the battle. They need to study their victims first, learn how to mimic human behavior. That's why they keep the original people alive for a while. To copy their memories, their mannerisms, their relationships. A chill ran down my spine. How long does that take? Depends on the person. Simple people, maybe a few days. Someone complex, with deep relationships and complicated emotions? Weeks, maybe months. I thought about the figures I'd seen in the cave. The old coal miner, the woman in the floral dress, the little boy. How long had they been trapped down there, having their humanity slowly drained away? What happens to the originals when the copying is done? Tommy's face darkened. They don't need them anymore. We spent the night at the station, taking turns keeping watch. Around 3 a.m. I heard voices outside, multiple people calling my name, asking for help. I looked out the window and saw them. The Henderson family stood at the edge of the clearing. Perfect replicas, down to the smallest detail. But they moved wrong, too stiff, like marionettes controlled by an amateur puppeteer. And they all stood at exactly the same angle, like they'd been positioned by someone with no understanding of natural human posture. Don't look at them too long, Tommy whispered. They're studying you, learning. The fake Henderson stood the yacht, for 2 hours, occasionally calling out in voices that were exactly right, but emotionally flat. When dawn broke, they simply turned and walked back into the forest in single file. Next morning, I radioed headquarters and requested a full search team. Within 6 hours, we had 12 rangers, 2 county sheriff's deputies, and a volunteer search and rescue team combing the Death Valley Ridge area. We found evidence of the Hendersons everywhere. Their car at the trailhead, registration papers showing they'd planned a 3-day hike, credit card receipts from a sporting goods store in D.C. where they'd bought supplies 2 days before leaving. Photographs on Linda's camera showing their first day on the trail. Normal family pictures of a normal family vacation. But we never found their bodies. What we did find was more caves, lots of them. Limestone passages that honeycomb the entire ridge, some connecting to each other in a maze that seemed to go on for miles. And in several caves we found belongings, old belongings. A woman's purse from the 1940s containing ration cards and a letter from someone's son serving in the Pacific. A child's wooden toy train, hand-carved and painted. A coal miner's lunch pail with his initials scratched into the metal. Dozens of items spanning decades, all perfectly preserved in the cool, dry cave air. Each item represented a person who had vanished in these mountains. People whose disappearances had been explained away as hiking accidents, animal attacks, or simple decisions to start new lives elsewhere. But I knew the truth now. They were all down in those caves somewhere, trapped in the dark, while things that looked exactly like them walked around above ground. On the second day of the search, we lost our first team member. Deputy Frank Morrison was exploring a cave about half a mile from where I'd found the Henderson copies. He radioed that he'd found something interesting and would report back in 20 minutes. An hour later, when he didn't respond to radio calls, we went looking for him. We found him sitting on a rock outside the cave entrance, smoking a cigarette, normal as could be. "Sorry, boys," he said when he saw us. "Radio's been acting up down there. Found some old mining equipment, but nothing related to our missing family." Something about his voice made Tommy and me exchange glances. Frank was a good old boy from coal mining stock, but he'd never called anyone boys in the 10 years I'd known him. And Frank had quit smoking 5 years earlier after his first heart attack. The thing wearing Frank's face looked at us with Frank's eyes, but behind them was that same terrible emptiness I'd seen in the cave, like looking at a photograph of a person instead of the person themselves. "Frank," I said carefully, "what's your wife's name?" "Margaret," he answered immediately. "Correct. We've been married 15 years. She teaches 3rd grade at Wise Elementary." All true. But he said it like he was reciting facts from a file, not talking about someone he loved. "What's your favorite thing about her?" Tommy asked. Frank's face went blank for just a moment. Then, "She's very nice. I like her very much." A man talking about his wife like she was a casual acquaintance. We found the real Frank Morrison 3 hours later, deep in the cave system, unconscious but alive. He was dehydrated and had a head injury, but he was still himself. His eyes still had life in them. The thing that looked like Frank disappeared while we were bringing the real Frank up from the caves. Just melted back into the forest like it had never existed, but I knew it was still out there, still learning, still watching. And now it knew exactly what I looked like, sounded like, and how I moved. Tommy and I made the decision not to tell the rest of the search team about what we'd discovered. They wouldn't have believed us, and it would have compromised the rescue operation. But that night, alone in my tent, I lay awake thinking about those empty eyes and wondering how many of the people I'd worked with over the years had been replaced by things from the deep caves. How would I know? How would anyone know? The thought that kept me awake was worse. What if they'd already copied me? What if there was another Ezra Thornfield walking around out there, wearing my face and learning how to be me? On the 3rd night, Tommy disappeared. I woke up at dawn to find his sleeping bag empty and his gear still in the tent. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away. He'd simply vanished sometime during the night. 2 hours later, I found him sitting by the creek, cleaning his rifle. "Morning, Ezra," he said without looking up. "Sleep well?" Everything about him looked right. Same clothes, same mannerisms, same voice. But Tommy always called me Thornfield, or Boss. Never Ezra. "Where'd you go last night?" I asked. "Couldn't sleep. Went for a walk." He looked up at me with those empty, terrible eyes. "Found some interesting tracks. Want to see?" I knew then that the real Tommy was gone. This thing had his face, his voice, his memories. It knew about the Nunahai because Tommy had known. It could clean a rifle because Tommy could clean a rifle. But it had no idea how Tommy and I really talked to each other, no understanding of our friendship. "Sure," I said. "Lead the way." It stood up and started walking toward Death Valley Ridge. I followed at a distance, my hand resting on my sidearm. Not that a gun would do much good against something that could phase through solid rock. The fake Tommy led me back to the original cave where I'd found the Henderson copies. But now the entrance was bigger, opened up like something had been carved away from inside. And standing around the entrance were 6 perfect human figures. The Henderson family, Frank Morrison, Tommy Whitehorse, and me. The thing wearing my face stepped forward and spoke in my exact voice. "Hello, Ezra. We've been waiting for you." It was like looking in a mirror, except the reflection was all wrong. It had pied my appearance perfectly. Every scar, every line on my weathered face, even the slight limp from my war injury. But it stood too straight, held its head at the wrong angle, and blinked too slowly. "We've learned so much from you," it continued. "About being human, about caring for the forest, about protecting people." The fake Tommy nodded. "Your memories are particularly rich. All that pain from the war, from losing your wife. So much emotion to study." "Where are the real people?" I demanded. "Down below," my double answered. "Safe and comfortable. They've taught us everything we need to know." The fake Henderson family stepped aside, revealing the cave entrance. In the darkness beyond, I could see lights. Not electric lights. Something softer, more organic, like foxfire or phosphorescent fungi. "Come see," the thing wearing Linda Henderson's face said. "Come see how peaceful it is." They wanted me to go into the cave. Once I was down there, they'd have the original me to study, to copy from. They could perfect their mimicry, learn all my subtle expressions and unconscious habits. Then they wouldn't need me anymore. "I don't think so," I said, backing away from the entrance. "But you belong with us now," my double said. "We know everything about you. Your guilt about the men you killed in Korea, your anger at God for taking your wife, your fear that you're not good enough to raise your sons." It was using my own memories against me, trying to make me doubt myself. And the worst part was, it was right about all of it. "Those feelings make you weak," it continued. "We can take them away, make you clean and perfect, like us." That's when I understood what the real horror was. These things didn't just steal human forms, they tried to steal human pain. They saw our emotions, our flaws, our struggles as imperfections to be corrected. But those imperfections were it made us human. I remembered something Tommy had told me the night before he disappeared. His Cherokee grandmother had taught him protection rituals, ways to create barriers that spirits couldn't cross. Sacred tobacco burned in a circle, certain words spoken in the old language. The fake Tommy must have copied that memory, but it wouldn't understand what the ritual meant. It would just see it as information, not as something sacred and powerful. I pulled out the pouch of tobacco Tommy had given me and started walking in a circle around the cave entrance, sprinkling the leaves on the ground. The six figures watched me but didn't move to stop me. They looked curious, like they were studying a new behavior to copy. When the circle was complete, I pulled out a match and lit the tobacco. It caught immediately, burning with a sweet, clean smoke. As the smoke rose, I spoke the Cherokee words Tommy had taught me. I didn't know what they meant, but I put all my faith and desperation into them. The effect was immediate. The six figures stepped back from the burning circle like they'd hit an invisible wall. Their perfect human masks slipped for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of what they really were underneath. Shadows. Just shadows in the rough shape of people, held together by stolen memories and malevolent will. "You can't keep us out forever," my double said. But its voice was fainter now, like it was speaking from far away. "Maybe not," I said, "but I can make sure no one else gets trapped down there." I pulled out the dynamite I'd brought from the ranger station. 4 sticks intended for clearing fallen trees from trails. The six figures realized what I was planning and moved toward the circle, but the sacred smoke held them back. "You'll kill the originals too," the fake Linda Henderson said. "The real people are still alive down there." It was probably telling the truth. Tommy, the real Henderson family, Frank Morrison, they were all trapped somewhere in that cave system, slowly having their humanity drained away. But if I didn't act now, these creatures would perfect their copies and move on to other hunting grounds. They'd spread through the mountains, replacing people one by one, until entire communities were nothing but hollow shells wearing familiar faces. I lit the fuse and threw the dynamite into the cave entrance. Then I ran. The explosion shook the entire ridge. Trees swayed, rocks tumbled down the mountainside, and a column of dust and smoke rose from where the cave had been. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but a pile of shattered limestone. The 6 figures were gone. Just vanished, like they'd never existed at all. I told the search team that we'd found evidence of a gas leak in the cave system and that I'd collapsed the entrance for safety reasons. The official report listed the Henderson family, Tommy Whitehorse and Frank Morrison, as casualties of a tragic accident caused by natural gas buildup and subsequent explosion. Frank Morrison's body was never found because the real Frank had survived and was recovering in a hospital, with no memory of his time in the caves. I told him he'd been injured in a climbing accident. He believed me. The families of the missing people deserved to know the truth, but what was I supposed to tell them? That their loved ones had been killed by ancient spirits wearing human faces? That I'd had to choose between saving a few people or protecting countless others? I kept quiet and filed my reports. A week later, I requested a transfer to the administrative office in Richmond. Desk job, pushing papers, far from the deep woods and dark caves. My supervisor thought it was PTSD from the rescue operation gone wrong. I let him think that. I spent the next 2 years studying everything I could find about Cherokee spiritual practices, protective rituals, and the legends of the Nunahai. I learned that Death Valley Ridge wasn't the only place they hunted. Similar stories existed throughout the Appalachian Mountains, wherever limestone caves ran deep enough to connect with whatever realm these creatures came from. The tobacco circle had worked because it created a barrier they couldn't cross, but it was temporary. The dynamite had sealed one entrance, but caves are tricky things. Water finds new ways through, and where water goes, other things can follow. I also learned something else that kept me awake at night. The Cherokee had a name for people who'd been replaced by Nunahi, but had somehow escaped or been freed. They called them the returned ones. They looked human, acted human, had all their original memories intact. But something was missing. Some essential spark that made them who they were. Sometimes I catch myself in mirrors and wonder, am I really Ezra Thornfield? Or am I just a very good copy who thinks he's real? I still have all my memories. I remember Sarah's laugh, the way my sons looked when they were babies, the terror and pride I felt fighting in Korea. I feel the appropriate emotions when I think about these things. But do I feel them, or do I just remember what feeling them was like? 3 months after the Death Valley Ridge incident, I got a call from a ranger in Tennessee. Similar disappearances in a remote area called Copperhead Hollow. Experienced hikers vanishing without a trace. A local man found his missing brother sitting calmly by a creek, acting just a little bit off. I told the Tennessee ranger to look for limestone caves and unusual cold spots. I told him about sacred tobacco and protection circles. I didn't tell him about the creatures wearing human faces, but I gave him enough information to recognize the signs. He thought I was crazy, of course, until he called me back 2 weeks later, his voice shaking, to tell me he'd found them. The missing hikers, standing in perfect formation in a cave chamber, staring at nothing with empty eyes. That was 5 years ago. Since then, I've gotten similar calls from rangers in Kentucky, West Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. The Nunahai, re-spreading, or maybe they were always there and I just learned how to recognize the signs. I help when I can, sharing what Tommy's grandmother taught him and what I learned through trial and terror. Most rangers think I'm just a desk jockey with too much time and a weird hobby. But a few listen. A few have seen things in deep caves that shouldn't exist. We can't stop them completely. They're too old, too patient, too good at what they do. But we can slow them down. We can teach people to recognize the signs. Perfect footprints, emotional flatness, temperature drops around cave entrances. We can remember that the people we love are more than just their faces and voices and memories. They're the spark behind their eyes, the warmth in their smiles, the way they say your name like it matters. My boys are grown now, both serving in Vietnam. I write to them every week, and they write back. Their letters sound like them. Same humor, same concerns, same way of looking at the world. But sometimes I find myself studying their handwriting, analyzing their word choices, looking for signs that something's wrong. Because I know now that there are things in the deep places that are always hungry for human warmth. Things that see our love, our pain, our messy, complicated emotions as weaknesses to be corrected. And they're patient. They can wait decades for the right moment, the right victim, the right opportunity to add another hollow person to their collection. So I keep watching, keep listening, keep carrying sacred tobacco and the words of protection Tommy taught me. Because somewhere in these mountains, in caves too deep and dark for sunlight, the Nunahai are still hunting. And they're getting better at being human every day. My name is Rebecca Ironside, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger here in the Monongahela National Forest for 13 years now. Started back in '66, right after I got out of the military police. I was the first woman ranger in this district, and let me tell you, that wasn't easy. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires. But out here in West Virginia, in these deep mountains, we deal with different kinds of problems. Black bears that get too friendly, wild boar that can tear a man apart, and sometimes things that don't have names. I moved to these mountains to get away from my past. Bad marriage, worse divorce. Up here at 4,100 feet, with the wind in the trees and the smell of pine all around, I found something I'd never had before. Peace. The other rangers became my family. Mike Steelwood, who taught me how to track a wounded bear through thick brush. Danny Marsh, who could spot a poacher from 2 miles away. Blackwater Gorge is my territory. It's an 8-mile canyon system carved deep into the mountain, with walls that drop straight down 500 feet. The river at the bottom runs black from all the tannins in the water, which is how it got its name. Most folks never see it up close because you need ropes and climbing gear just to get down there. The locals have stories about the gorge. Old stories. They talk about something they call the vampire beast. Livestock found drained of blood back in the 1920s. Hunters who went in and never came out. I always figured they were just tall tales, the kind of stories mountain people tell to keep outsiders away. That was before September of 1979. It started on a Tuesday morning when I got the call. 5 hunters from Maryland had been reported missing. They'd paid for permits to hunt the rim areas around Blackwater Gorge, but nobody had seen them in 3 days. Their wives were worried sick. Probably just got turned around, I told the state police dispatcher. Happens all the time with city folks. But something felt wrong from the start. These weren't weekend warriors with new gear and no experience. The permits showed they'd been hunting these mountains for years. They knew the territory. I organized a search team with Mike and Danny. We started at their last known campsite, about 2 miles from the gorge rim. The weather had been strange that week, hot during the day, but dropping to 50 degrees at night. Heavy fog rolled in every morning, thick as soup. When we found their camp, I knew this wasn't going to be simple. The tents were still up, perfectly arranged. Their rifles were stacked against a tree, everyone loaded and ready. The campfire had burned down to cold ash. But here's what made my skin crawl. Every piece of food in that camp had been drained dry. Not eaten. Drained. Cans of beans were empty, but looked like they'd never been opened. Packages of meat were just dry husks. "What kind of animal does that?" Danny asked, poking at a shriveled apple with a stick. I'd been tracking predators for over a decade. I'd seen what bears do to campsites, how raccoons tear into food supplies, what happens when wild boar get into human food. This was something else entirely. The forest around the camp was wrong too. Dead quiet. In 13 years of walking these mountains, I'd never heard silence like that. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow. "We need to check the gorge," I said, though every instinct I had was screaming at me to pack up and leave. We spent 2 hours setting up ropes and pulleys to get down into Blackwater Gorge. The fog was so thick that morning we could barely see 10 feet ahead. Our flashlights seemed dimmer than usual, and I had to change batteries twice before noon. The canyon floor was like stepping into another world. The black water moved fast and quiet between moss-covered rocks. Everything was green and wet and cold, even though it was 80 degrees up on the rim. Sound behaved strangely down there. Voices echoed off the walls in ways that made it hard to tell where someone was calling from. We found the first body around 2 in the afternoon. His name was Robert Chen, according to his hunting license. He was lying on a flat rock beside the river, and at first glance he looked like he was just sleeping. No wounds we could see, no blood. His clothes weren't even torn, but when Mike rolled him over, we all stepped back fast. The man looked like he'd been dead for months, not days. His skin was gray and papery, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes had sunk deep into his skull. When I checked for a pulse, his wrist felt like it was made of sticks wrapped in leather. "Jesus," Danny whispered. "What happened to him?" I'd seen bodies before. Military police showed me things I'd rather forget. But this was different. This man hadn't just died. He'd been emptied out. We found the other 4 spread along the river, each one the same way, dried up like old fruit left in the sun. No signs of struggle. No defensive wounds. They'd all just laid down and stopped. That's when I saw the arrangement. The bodies weren't scattered randomly. From up on a fallen log, you could see they formed a perfect circle around a flat area of stone near the water. In the center of that circle, scratched deep into the rock, were symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, really old. "We need to get out of here," Mike said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. Mike had been a ranger for 20 years. He'd handled everything from mountain lion attacks to finding suicide victims. I'd never heard him sound scared before. But as we started packing up our gear, Danny called out from upstream, "Becca, you need to see this." He'd found a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall. The opening was about 8 feet tall, and perfectly round, like it had been carved instead of formed naturally. Our flashlights showed it going back into the mountain farther than we could see. "Should we check it out?" Danny asked. Every smart part of my brain said no. Every regulation in the Ranger handbook said we should radio for backup, wait for the state police, follow proper procedure. But those 5 men had families waiting for answers. And I had a job to do. "Stay close," I said, switching on my headlamp, "and keep your radios on." The cave was bigger inside than it looked from outside. Our lights showed smooth walls that seemed to curve and flow like they'd been melted instead of carved. The floor was covered with a thick layer of something that crunched under our boots. It took a few steps before I realized what we were walking on. Bones, thousands of them. Some looked fresh. Others had turned yellow with age. I saw deer ribs and bear skulls, but there were other bones too. Bones that were the wrong size and shape. Bones that looked almost human, but not quite. "How deep does this go?" Mike's voice echoed off the walls. We followed the tunnel deeper into the mountain. The air got colder with every step, and that strange silence from outside seemed even thicker in here. Our lights kept dimming no matter how many fresh batteries we put in. Then we heard it, a sound like leather wings, but bigger than any bird. It came from somewhere deeper in the cave, echoing off the walls until we couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. Then silence again. "Time to go," I said. But as we turned to leave, Danny's light caught something carved into the wall near the entrance. More of those symbols, but these looked newer. And below them, scratched in what looked like a child's handwriting, 1953, Johnson family, 4 missing. 1961, Henderson hunting party, 6 missing. 1970, college students, 3 missing. Every 7 to 9 years. Always the same location, always the same ending. We climbed out of that gorge faster than we'd ever moved before. But even as we drove back to the ranger station, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us leave. That night, Mike called in sick, said he felt weak and dizzy. Danny helped me file the report, but we both agreed to keep the cave discovery quiet until we could figure out what we were dealing with. Neither of us slept well that night. The next morning, Mike didn't show up for work. When I drove to his cabin, I found him unconscious on his kitchen floor. He was pale as paper and cold to the touch, but still breathing. The paramedics said his blood pressure was so low they were amazed he was alive. At the hospital, the doctor pulled me aside. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, looking confused. "His blood count is extremely low, but there's no sign of bleeding anywhere. It's like his body just stopped making blood." Mike was tough. 20 years in these mountains, and I'd never seen him sick a day in his life. Whatever had happened to those hunters, it was happening to him too. That night, Danny and I went back to Blackwater Gorge. I know it sounds crazy. Every smart part of me knew we should have called for backup, brought in state police, maybe even federal authorities. But Mike was dying, and whatever was in that cave had done it to him. We set up camp on the rim this time, with a clear view of the canyon below. 2 sleeping bags, a campfire, and enough gear to last the night. The plan was simple: watch and wait, see if anything came out of that cave after dark. The fog rolled in just after sunset, thicker than I'd ever seen it. Our fire seemed to push it back only a few feet. Beyond that circle of light, the world just disappeared. Around midnight, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 5 minutes. Our breath started showing in the air, and frost began forming on our sleeping bags, even though it was still September. That's when we saw it. At first, it looked like a shadow moving against the fog. Something large gliding between the canyon walls without making a sound. But shadows don't have glowing red eyes. "Tell me you see that," Danny whispered. I saw it. 12 feet tall at least, with wings that stretched twice that wide. It moved through the air like it was swimming, smooth and controlled. And it was hunting. We watched it circle the canyon for maybe 10 minutes, those red eyes scanning the rocks below like searchlights. Then it folded its wings and dove straight down into the cave entrance behind the waterfall. "What the hell was that thing?" Danny asked. Before I could answer, we heard screaming. Not human screaming. Something else. Something that sounded like metal tearing and wind howling and voices crying out all at once. The sound came up from the canyon and bounced off the walls until it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. Then, silence. Danny was shaking. Hell, I was shaking too. But we stayed put until sunrise, taking shifts to watch the cave entrance. Nothing else moved down there all night. In the morning, we climbed down to investigate. The bones in the cave had been rearranged into new patterns and carved fresh into the wall in the same childish handwriting. 1979, Chen hunting party, 5 missing. 1979, Steelwood, 1 sick. That afternoon, Mike died in the hospital. The doctors said his heart just stopped. No reason they could find. Danny quit the next day, packed up his cabin and moved back to Ohio without even saying goodbye. Can't say I blamed him. But I couldn't leave. This thing, whatever it was my responsibility now, my territory, my problem to solve. I spent the next week researching everything I could find about Blackwater Gorge. Old newspaper articles, Native American legends, folklore from the early settlers. What I found made my blood run cold. The Seneca tribe had stories about this place going back hundreds of years. They called it the home of the flying death, a spirit that fed on life itself. According to their legends, it slept for long periods, then woke up, hungry. When it woke, people died. The pattern was always the same. Every 7 to 9 years, people would disappear, always in groups, always drained dry, always near the gorge, and according to my calculations, it was just getting started. I went back to Blackwater Gorge alone on a Friday night in late September. Stupid? Yeah. But I was done running from this thing. Mike was dead because of it. Danny was so traumatized he'd abandoned the job he loved. And somewhere in that cave was a creature that had been killing people for generations. I brought everything I could carry. Flares, rope, camping gear, my service pistol, and a flare gun I'd borrowed from the Coast Guard station down in Charleston. If this thing was real, if it was hunting people in my forest, then I was going to face it head on. The fog was waiting for me like an old friend, thick and cold and unnatural. My flashlight died within an hour, even with fresh batteries. The backup lasted maybe 30 minutes. After that, I had to rely on chemical light sticks and the occasional flare. I set up on the canyon floor this time, right in the center of that stone circle where we'd found the bodies. If the creature was territorial, if it had claimed this place as its hunting ground, then this is where it would come. I didn't have to wait long. Around 11 o'clock, the temperature plunged. Frost formed on the rocks so fast I could hear it crackling. The fog grew thicker until I couldn't see my own hands, and then I heard it breathing, slow, deep breaths that echoed off the canyon walls. Each exhale sent ripples across the black water. Whatever this thing was, it was huge. The red eyes appeared first, floating in the fog about 20 feet away. They moved side to side like it was studying me, trying to figure out what I was doing there. Then the fog parted, and I saw it completely for the first time. 12 feet, tall, just like we'd estimated. Its body was humanoid, but stretched out like someone had taken a person and pulled them in all directions. The skin was black and leathery, stretched tight over prominent bones. Its arms were too long, ending in hands with fingers like knives. But it was the wings that made me understand why people called it the Flying Death. They spread out from its shoulders like torn sails, easily 20 feet across. When it moved them, they didn't flap like a bird's wings. They rippled like water. And those eyes, red as fresh blood and bright as headlights. When it looked at me, I felt something probe at the edges of my mind. Not thoughts exactly, but intentions. Hunger, curiosity, and something that might have been amusement. It spoke without moving its mouth. The words just appeared in my head, like my own thoughts. You are not afraid. I was terrified. But I'd been scared before. In the army, during my marriage, the first time I'd tracked a wounded bear through thick brush. Fear was just another thing to work through. What are you? I asked out loud. I am what remains when everything else is taken. The creature moved closer, and I could see details that made my stomach turn. Its chest rose and fell with each breath, but there were no lungs visible beneath the stretched skin. Instead, I could see something dark and liquid moving around inside, like it was full of black water. You taste of old pain. Delicious. That's when I understood. This thing didn't just feed on blood or flesh. It fed on suffering, on fear and grief and all the dark emotions that people carried around inside them. No wonder it had targeted the hunters. 5 men from the city, probably dealing with divorce or job stress or family problems. Easy prey. No wonder it had gone after Mike so hard. He'd been carrying guilt about his son's death in Vietnam for years. And no one dare it was interested in me. A woman running from an abusive marriage, alone in the mountains, surrounded by violence and loss. Yes, you understand now. The creature started moving toward Boz. Me, and I felt that mental pressure again, like invisible hands trying to hold me still while it fed. I'd felt something like it before, when my ex-husband used to corner me in our kitchen, using his size and anger to make me freeze up. But I wasn't that scared woman anymore. I pulled the flare gun and fired it straight into the creature's chest. The flare hit and exploded in a shower of red sparks. The creature screamed, actually screamed this time, not that mental voice, and stumbled backward. Where the flare had hit, its skin was burning like paper. Fire. You brought fire. It sounded surprised, maybe even afraid. I lit another flare and held it like a torch. The creature backed away, those red eyes never leaving my face. That's right, I said. Fire, light, everything you're not. But I only had so many flares, and this thing had been hunting these mountains for centuries. It knew the terrain better than I did, and it was fast. It leapt straight up, wings spread wide, and disappeared into the fog above the canyon walls. For a moment, I thought maybe it had given up. Maybe it was fleeing. Then I heard it laughing. The sound came from everywhere at once, bouncing off the canyon walls until I couldn't tell up from down. And I realized what it was doing. Circling above me, staying out of range of my flares, waiting for them to burn out. That's when I remembered the gasoline. I'd brought a small camp stove and fuel for cooking. Maybe 2 gallons of white gas in plastic bottles. If I could create a bigger fire, something that would last longer than the flares. I poured the gasoline in a wide circle around the stone area, keeping 1 bottle for myself. Then I lit the whole thing with my last flare. The fire roared to life, creating a wall of flame 8 feet high. The creature screamed again and landed hard on the rocks outside the circle. Up close, I could see too. Had its skin was actually smoking where the firelight touched it. Clever, but fire burns out. It was right. I had maybe 10 minutes before the gasoline was gone. Then I'd be defenseless. But 10 minutes was enough to learn something important. This thing was old and powerful, but it had rules. Limitations. It couldn't cross running water. That's why it used the cave entrance behind the waterfall instead of just flying directly to the river. It couldn't handle bright light or fire, and it seemed tied to this specific location. Most importantly, it needed to feed regularly. The 7 to 9 year cycle wasn't random. It was hibernation. This creature would gorge itself on victims, then sleep for years while it digested all that stolen life. But what if it couldn't feed? What if something interrupted the cycle? As the flames started to die down, I made a decision that probably should have gotten me killed. I ran straight at the creature, the last bottle of gasoline in one hand and a lit flare in the other. It was so surprised that it didn't react until I was almost on top of it. Then those knife-like fingers came slashing down, opening up 3 deep cuts across my shoulder. But I was already moving, rolling under its reach and coming up behind it. I smashed the plastic bottle against the back of its head, soaking its wings with gasoline. Then I touched the flare to its back. The creature went up like a bonfire. It screamed and thrashed and tried to fly, but the flames had caught its wings. Instead of lifting off, it crashed into the canyon wall and slid down into the black water. The river started boiling where it hit. Steam rose up in great clouds, and I could hear the creature still screaming somewhere beneath the surface. Then silence. I climbed out of Blackwater Gorge at sunrise, bleeding and exhausted but alive. The cuts on my shoulder needed 20 stitches, and I had to tell the doctor I'd been attacked by a bear. He didn't believe me, but he fixed me up anyway. In my official report, I wrote that the Maryland hunting party had been killed by a rogue black bear, which I had successfully tracked and eliminated. The cave entrance was declared geologically unstable and sealed with explosives for public safety. Mike's death was listed as a heart attack brought on by stress. Danny's sudden departure was recorded as early retirement due to family obligations. The truth stayed buried with the creature at the bottom of Blackwater Gorge. But I knew it wasn't really dead. Things like that don't die easy. They just wait. I transferred to day shifts only. Can't handle being in the dark woods anymore. Every shadow looks like wings. Every strange sound makes me reach for my flare gun. The other rangers think I'm getting soft, approaching retirement age. Maybe they're right. I still patrol the gorge area, but only during daylight hours. I've set up motion sensors and wildlife cameras around the sealed cave entrance. Most of the time, they don't show anything unusual. But sometimes, late at night when I'm reviewing the footage, I see shapes moving in the black water. Things that are too big to be fish, too fluid to be debris. And every few years I get reports of missing hikers in the area. Single individuals usually, people hiking alone who just disappear. Their bodies are never found. I think the creature is still down there, wounded but not dead. Learning to hunt differently. Adapting. The cycle used to be 7 to 9 years between major feeding events. But individual disappearances? Those happen more often now. Like it's having to snack between meals because the big feast got interrupted. Sometimes I wonder if I should have left well enough alone. Let it sleep its long sleep and take its scheduled victims instead of forcing it to change its pattern. But then I remember Mike and those 5 hunters and all the people whose bones were scattered in that cave. Some things are worth fighting, even if you can't really win. My name is Rebecca Ironside, and I've been guarding Blackwater Gorge for 37 years now. The official records say it's a routine patrol assignment in a low-risk area, but I know better. Some nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the temperature drops for no reason, I can feel it down there. Waiting, watching, getting stronger. And I know that someday, when I'm too old to climb down those canyon walls with a flare gun and a bottle of gasoline, it's going to come back. When that day comes, I just hope whoever takes over this territory is smart enough to listen to the old stories, and brave enough to believe them. My name is Vincent Darkwater, but everyone calls me Vince. I've been a forest ranger for 15 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people pack up and move to the city. But what happened on Savage Mountain in August of 1985? That changed everything. I worked the night shift in the George Washington National Forest, right on the border between Maryland and West Virginia. Most rangers don't like the night patrol, but I do. Maybe it's because of my time in Vietnam. The jungle taught me how to see in the dark, how to listen for sounds that don't belong. After the war, I couldn't sleep anyway, so why not get paid for staying awake? Savage Mountain is my beat. It rises 20,800 feet above sea level, covered in thick woods that block out most of the sunlight even during the day. At night, it's like being inside a cave with trees. The mountain got its name from the early settlers, and trust me, it earned it. There are caves everywhere, some natural, some left over from the old coal mines. Most of the mines closed down in the 1890s after some bad accidents. Folks say a whole group of miners got trapped in a cave-in and never made it out. I live alone in a ranger station about 10 miles up the mountain road. It's just me, my radio, and my truck. That's how I like it. People are more trouble than they're worth most of the time. Animals, now they make sense. They do what they need to do to survive. No games, no lies. The station sits at the edge of a clearing surrounded by oak and pine trees so tall you can't see their tops. During the day, you might hear a woodpecker or a squirrel. At night, it's mostly quiet except for the owls and sometimes a coyote calling from far off. I know every sound these woods make, and I can tell when something doesn't belong. That's why I noticed it right away when things started getting weird. It was a Tuesday night in August, hot and sticky, even after the sun went down. I was doing my usual patrol, driving the fire roads and checking the camping areas. Most people don't camp this far up the mountain, but sometimes you get college kids who think they're tough enough for the backcountry. I was heading back to the station around midnight when I saw the truck parked at the Cave Hollow trailhead. It was a beat-up Ford with Virginia plates and camping gear strapped to the roof. 4 kids, looked like college age, probably here to explore the caves. I made a note of the license plate and figured I'd check on them the next day, but they never came back. When I found their truck still there Thursday morning, I called it in. Cave Rescue showed up around noon, 3 guys who knew these cave systems better than anyone. The leader was a guy named Martinez, who'd been pulling people out of holes in the ground for 20 years. "How many kids?" he asked, looking at the gear scattered around their campsite. 4, I think. 2 tents, 4 sleeping bags. I pointed to the cave entrance about 50 yards away. "Probably went into Devil's Throat. It's the biggest opening around here." Martinez nodded. "We'll find them. Kids get lost in there all the time. These caves go on for miles underground." But when the rescue team came back that evening, they looked confused. Martinez pulled me aside. "Something's not right," he said. "We found some of their stuff, a flashlight, a rope, a backpack, but it was scattered through 3 different caves miles apart. How does that happen?" I didn't have an answer. The caves connected underground, but you'd have to know the system pretty well to get from one entrance to another. And these kids were from Virginia, probably never been here before. "Maybe they split up," I suggested. "Maybe." Martinez didn't sound convinced. "But there's something else. The temperature down there, and it's all wrong. Some places are cold as a freezer, others are warm like a bath. And my compass kept spinning. Never seen anything like it." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those kids somewhere in the dark under the mountain. I'd seen plenty of people get lost in the woods over the years. Most of the time they wandered around for a day or two and then found their way out. But caves were different. Caves could kill you. I got up around 2 a.m. and made some coffee. The night was quiet, but something felt off. The usual sounds weren't there. No owls, no insects, nothing. Even the wind had stopped. I stepped outside and listened. That's when I heard it. A sound like scratching coming from the direction of the caves. Soft at first, then louder, like fingernails on rock, but bigger, much bigger. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, but by the time I got close to Cave Hollow, it had stopped. Everything was quiet again. Too quiet. I should have known right then that something was hunting on Savage Mountain, something that had been waiting a long time for fresh prey. The next morning, I called Martinez and told him about the scratching sounds. He didn't laugh, which was good. A lot of people would have. "We're going back down today," he said. "Got 2 more guys coming from the state police cave unit. If those kids are still alive, we'll find them." By noon, we had 6 people at the cave entrance: Martinez and his team, 2 state cops who specialized in underground rescue, and me. We also had a geologist from the university, Dr. Paul Anderson. He was a thin guy with thick glasses who kept taking notes about everything. "This whole mountain is like Swiss cheese," Dr. Anderson explained, pointing to a map of the cave system. "The limestone has been carved out by water for thousands of years. There are passages down there that haven't been mapped yet." Martinez split us into 2 teams. He took the state cops into Devil's Throat, the main cave entrance. Dr. Anderson and I went with a cave rescue specialist named Maria Santos to check some of the smaller openings on the north side of the mountain. Maria was tough. She was maybe 30 years old, built like a rock climber, and she moved through the caves like she was born underground. "Been doing this for 12 years, she told me as we hiked up to the first entrance. "Never lost anybody yet." The first cave was a bust, too small for the college kids to have gone very far. The second one was bigger, with a passage that went back about 100 yards before splitting into 2 tunnels. "This is where it gets tricky," Maria said, shining her light down both passages. "Left goes deeper into the mountain, right curves back toward the main system." We took the left passage. The cave got narrow, then wide, then narrow again. Our flashlights made weird shadows on the walls, and every step echoed like we were walking through a cathedral. After about 10 minutes, we found something. "Hey!" Dr. Anderson called out. He was kneeling next to a small pile of rocks. "Look at this." It was a campfire ring, made out of flat stones arranged in a perfect circle, but it was inside the cave, maybe 200 yards from the entrance. And the rocks were the wrong kind, smooth and dark, not like anything I'd seen in these caves before. "Who builds a fire this far underground?" I asked. Maria shook her head. "Nobody. Too dangerous. Carbon monoxide would kill you in minutes." Dr. Anderson was looking at the walls around the fire ring. "There's something carved here," he said. "Looks like symbols?" I shined my light where he pointed. There were marks scratched into the limestone, but they weren't like any writing I'd ever seen. They looked more like claw marks, but too organized, too deliberate. "How old do you think these are?" Maria asked. "Hard to say. Could be recent, could be centuries old. The cave environment preserves things differently than the surface." That's when we heard the sound, a low humming, coming from deeper in the cave. It started soft, like someone humming a tune, but it didn't sound quite human. The pitch was wrong somehow. "Hello!" Maria called out. "Cave rescue! Can anyone hear us?" The humming stopped. We waited for a few seconds. Then Maria tried again. "If you're hurt, we're here to help." This time something answered, but it wasn't words. It was more like an echo of Maria's voice, but distorted, like it was coming through water. Maria looked at me. "That's weird." We followed the passage deeper into the mountain. The humming started again, always just ahead of us, always just out of sight. The cave walls got smoother, like they'd been carved instead of formed by water, and the temperature kept changing, cold for a few steps, then warm, then cold again. After what felt like an hour of walking, we came to a large chamber. Our flashlights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. It was like being inside a cathedral made of stone. And there, in the middle of the chamber, we found one of the missing college kids. He was sitting on the ground with his back against a rock formation, staring straight ahead. His name was printed on his backpack, Jason. He was maybe 20 years old, thin, with brown hair that hung in his eyes. "Jason!" Maria rushed over to him. "Are you okay? Where are the others?" The kid didn't respond. He just kept staring at something we couldn't see. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't seem to be looking at anything. Maria waved her hand in front of his face. "He's in shock," she said. "Jason, can you hear me? We're here to help." That's when I noticed his fingernails. They were torn and bloody, like he'd been clawing at something, and his clothes were dirty, covered in a white dust that I'd never seen before. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Where are your friends?" He turned his head toward me, slow like he was moving through mud. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "They came up from below," he said. "They wanted us to go with them." "Who came up?" Maria asked. "Who wanted you to go with them?" "The pale ones. They live down there." Jason pointed to a passage on the far side of the chamber. "They've been waiting so long." Dr. Anderson was examining the walls around us. "There's more carving here," he said. "A lot more. It covers almost the whole chamber." I looked where he was pointing. The symbols were everywhere, carved deep into the stone. Some looked fresh, others were worn smooth like they'd been there for decades, or longer. "We need to get Jason out of here," Maria said. "He needs medical attention." But as we helped Jason to his feet, we heard something that made us all freeze. Footsteps coming from the passage he'd pointed to. Slow, deliberate footsteps, but wrong somehow. Like someone walking who had forgotten how. The footsteps got closer. Our flashlights shined into the dark passage, but we couldn't see anything. The sound echoed off the cave walls, making it seem like it was coming from everywhere at once. "Who's there?" I called out, my hand moving to the pistol on my belt. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness, something called back to us. It was trying to copy my voice, but it sounded like a broken recording. "Who's there? Who's there? Who's there?" Maria grabbed my arm. "We need to leave, now." We started backing toward the passage we'd come from, supporting Jason between us. He was mumbling something under his breath, over and over. "They're hungry," he whispered. "They've been so hungry for so long." That's when I saw them. Just at the edge of our flashlight beams, pale shapes moving in the darkness. They were trying to stay hidden, but I caught glimpses. White skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Movements that were too quick and too quiet for anything human. We ran. We made it out of the cave with Jason, but Jude said barely. Something followed us all the way to the entrance. I could hear it moving in the darkness behind us, keeping pace but never getting close enough for our lights to catch it. Clearly. The paramedics took Jason to the hospital, but he wouldn't say anything else about what had happened to his friends. The doctors said he was dehydrated and suffering from severe trauma. They kept him for 3 days, and when he was released, he went straight home to Virginia. He never came back to Savage Mountain. Martinez's team found more evidence that afternoon. They discovered camping gear scattered through 4 different caves, and all of it was covered in the same white dust we'd seen on Jason. More strange symbols carved into the cave walls, and something else that made Martinez call me aside. "We found blood," he said, keeping his voice low so the state cops wouldn't hear. "A lot of it, but no bodies." "Where?" "Deep in the main system, maybe half a mile underground. Looks like something was dragged through there, something big." That night I couldn't stay at the ranger station. Every sound made me jump, every shadow looked like it was moving. I drove into town and got a room at the motel, telling myself I just needed a break from the mountain. But the mountain wouldn't let me go. Dr. Anderson called me the next morning. He sounded excited and scared at the same time. "I've been researching the symbols we found," he said. "I think I know what they mean." We met at a diner in town. Anderson spread out photos of the cave markings on the table between us. "These aren't random scratches," he said. "They're a language, a very old language. And some of these symbols match markings found in caves across Appalachia." "What do they say?" "That's the problem. Most of them are warnings. Stay away. Danger below. The hungry ones wait." He pulled out a notebook filled with his translations. "But some of them are different. They're like directions, or maybe invitations." "Invitations to what?" Anderson leaned closer. "There are stories, Vince, old stories, that the Cherokee told about these mountains. They called them the underground people, humans who went into the caves and never came back. Over time, they adapted, changed, became something else. You're talking about legends. Am I? Think about it. The coal mining accidents in the 1890s. Whole crews disappeared, presumed dead. But what if they weren't dead? What if they survived down there, lived down there for generations? I thought about the pale shapes I'd seen in the cave, the way they moved, the sound of that distorted voice echoing back at us. Even if that were true, I said, why now? Why are they taking people now? Anderson's face went pale. Because they need fresh genetic material. They've been isolated for over a century. They're dying out unless they bring in new blood. That afternoon, Maria Santos disappeared. She'd gone back into the caves with 2 state cops, following up on a lead about where the other missing college kids might be. The cops came back alone, and they were shaking. She was right behind us, one of them told me. We were maybe 50 feet apart, staying in contact by radio. Then her radio went dead, and when we went back to check on her, she was gone. Gone how? Just gone, like she vanished. But there were drag marks in the cave floor, leading down toward the deeper passages. I knew I had to go back down there. Martinez tried to talk me out of it. It's too dangerous, he said. We don't know what we're dealing with. I know exactly what we're dealing with, I told him. And that's why I have to go. That night, I went into Devil's Throat alone. I brought extra batteries, 2 flashlights, my pistol, and a combat knife from my army days. If something was hunting in these caves, I was going to hunt it back. The cave was different at night. The sounds echoed differently. The air felt thicker, and the darkness seemed to push against my flashlight beam. I followed the main passage toward the chamber where we'd found Jason, but I took a different route, one that would bring me up behind where I'd seen the pale shapes. About halfway there, I started finding signs, footprints in the soft cave mud, but they weren't human footprints. The toes were too long, the spacing too wide, and they pressed deep like whatever made them was carrying something heavy. I followed the tracks through a narrow passage that opened into a cavern I'd never seen before. And that's where I found Maria. She was alive, but barely. They had her tied to a rock formation in the center of the cavern, surrounded by those stone circles like the one we'd found earlier. She was unconscious, but breathing. That's when I got my first good look at them. There were maybe a dozen of them scattered around the cavern. They looked human, but wrong. Their skin was white as paper and seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. Their eyes were huge, taking up most of their faces, and they reflected my flashlight beam like mirrors. They were thin, almost skeletal, but they moved with a fluid grace that made my skin crawl, and they were all staring at me. The biggest one, maybe what passed for their leader, stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through a tunnel. "You came back," it said. "Good. We have been waiting." "Let her go," I said, keeping my gun trained on the leader. "She hasn't done anything to you." It tilted its head, studying me. "She will join us, as will you, as will all who enter our domain." "Your domain? This is national forest land." Something that might have been laughter echoed through the cavern. "We were here before your forests, before your people, before your sun." That's when I noticed the bones. They were piled in the corners of the cavern, human bones that had been cleaned and arranged in careful patterns. Some looked old, maybe decades old. Others looked fresh. "The miners," I whispered. "They were the first," the leader said, "but not the last. We have been collecting. Slowly, carefully, but now we need more. Our children are weak. They need strong blood." One of the smaller ones moved toward Maria. I shifted my aim and put a bullet through its chest. The creature stumbled backward, but didn't fall. Instead, it looked down at the wound with what seemed like curiosity. "Interesting," the leader said, "but bullets cannot kill what is already dead." That's when they all rushed me at once. I fought them with everything I had, but they were fast. Faster than anything human had a right to be. They moved like spiders, crawling on the walls and ceiling, coming at me from all directions at once. My gun was useless. The bullets passed right through them, or maybe they just didn't care about getting shot. But my combat knife worked better. When I slashed at them, they pulled back, making sounds like steam escaping from a radiator. I managed to cut Maria free while they regrouped. She was awake but groggy, maybe drugged with something. "Vince," she mumbled. "What's happening?" "We're leaving," I told her. "Right now." But the creatures had positioned themselves between us and the exit. The leader spoke again, and this time its voice seemed to come from all of them at once. "You cannot leave. You have seen too much. Learned too much. You must join us or die here." "There's a third option," I said, pulling out the last thing I'd brought from my army days. A white phosphorus grenade, the kind we used to clear tunnel systems in Vietnam. The leader's huge eyes fixed on the grenade. "What is that?" "Insurance." I pulled the pin but held the handle down. If I let go, we had about 4 seconds before the grenade filled the cavern with chemical fire hot enough to melt stone. "You would kill yourself?" the leader asked. "If I have to. But first you're going to tell me where the other missing people are." "They are being prepared." "For what?" "To join us, to become us. The process takes time." Maria grabbed my arm. "Vince, there's a passage behind us. I can see air moving." I backed toward where she was pointing, keeping the grenade ready. The creatures followed, but they kept their distance. "The college kids," I said to the leader. "Where are they?" "Below, in the deep places. They are changing." "Changing into what?" "What we all become eventually. What you will become." The passage Maria had spotted led upward, toward what I hoped was another exit. We started backing into it, and the creatures followed like a pale tide. "You cannot escape us," the leader called. "We know every tunnel, every passage. This mountain is our body, and you are moving through our veins." But I knew something they didn't. I'd studied these caves for 15 years, and I'd noticed something during our earlier explorations. The limestone had stress fractures running through it, weak points where the mountain was slowly collapsing under its own weight. The passage we were in showed signs of instability, loose rocks, cracks in the ceiling, the sound of water dripping somewhere far above. If I placed the grenade right, maybe I could bring down enough of the tunnel to stop them from following us. We reached a point where the passage narrowed, with support pillars of natural stone holding up the ceiling. It was perfect. "Keep going," I told Maria. "Find the exit." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." But we both knew I was lying. I waited until she was around the next bend, then I let go of the grenade handle and threw it as far back toward the creatures as I could. 4 seconds. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, following the upward slope of the passage, hearing the creatures screaming behind me as they realized what was about to happen. 3 seconds. The passage curved left, then right, then opened into a wider area where I could see stars through a crack in the ceiling. 2 seconds. I dove forward, covering my head with my hands. 1 second. The world exploded. The grenade went off like a piece of the sun, filling the passage with light and heat and the sound of tons of rock falling. The shockwave knocked me flat, and I felt the mountain shaking around me like an earthquake. When the dust settled, the passage behind us was gone, sealed under maybe 50 feet of collapsed limestone. Maria helped me to my feet. We were in a small cave with an opening that led out onto a ledge about halfway up Savage Mountain. Dawn was breaking over the forest below. "Are they dead?" she asked. I looked back at where the passage had been. "I don't know. Maybe some of them." But even as I said it, I could hear sounds from deep underground, scratching sounds, digging sounds. They were trying to clear the passage. "We need to get out of here," I said. The official report said there had been a cave-in caused by geological instability. The missing college students were presumed dead, lost in an unmapped section of the cave system that was now sealed forever. Dr. Anderson backed up my story. So did Maria, after I convinced her that telling the truth would only get us locked up in a mental hospital. The state police closed the investigation and posted warnings about the dangers of exploring unmapped caves. But I knew better. 2 weeks after the cave-in, I was transferred to a different district at my own request. I couldn't stay on Savage Mountain. Every night I could hear them digging, scratching, working their way through the tons of rock I'd dropped on them. And sometimes, late at night, I would see pale figures moving through the trees around my station, watching, waiting. Maria quit the cave rescue service and moved to Colorado. She sends me a postcard every Christmas, but we never talk about what happened in the caves. Some things are better left buried. Dr. Anderson published a paper about the geological formations in the George Washington National Forest. He never mentioned the symbols we found or the creatures that carved them, but sometimes he calls me, usually after he's been drinking. "They're still down there, aren't they?" he asked during his last call. "Yeah," I told him. "They're still down there." I've been a forest ranger for 23 years now. I work the day shift in open country, far from any caves or underground passages. But I still can't sleep at night, and I still jump at every sound, because I know the truth about what lives under these mountains. I know that some of the missing hikers and campers we never find aren't lost in the woods. They're taken underground, dragged down into the deep places where pale things wait in the darkness. The Cherokee were right about the underground people. They've been down there for over a century, growing stronger, growing hungrier, waiting for the right time to come back to the surface. And I think that time is coming soon. Last month, there were reports of missing campers in 3 different national forests across Appalachia, all near cave systems, all in places where the Cherokee told stories about things that live underground. If you're reading this and you like to explore caves, I want you to remember something. If you find symbols carved into the walls, if the temperature doesn't make sense, if you hear voices echoing back at you in a way that sounds wrong, get out. Get out fast and don't look back. Because what lives under these mountains has been waiting a long time for fresh blood, and they're not done collecting. My name is Vincent Darkwater, and I've seen the night crawlers of Savage Mountain. I pray you never do. My name is Bobby Silverton, and I've been watching over Point Pleasant Ridge for 11 years now. Started this job right out of high school in 1955 when I was just 18 and thought I knew everything about these West Virginia mountains. Now I'm 29, engaged to the prettiest school teacher in the county, and I can tell you one thing for sure. There are things in these woods that no amount of ranger training can prepare you for. Point Pleasant Ridge sits about 1,500 feet above the Ohio River, thick with oak and maple trees that turn the whole mountainside into a sea of red and gold come fall. My fire tower rises 80 feet above the tree line, giving me a view that stretches clear to Kentucky on a good day. It's peaceful work most of the time, checking for smoke, monitoring weather patterns, radioing in reports to the Forestry Service down in Charleston. The kind of job where you get to know every bird call, every animal track, every way the wind sounds when it's bringing in a storm. I grew up hearing stories from the old-timers, coal miners and river workers who'd been in these parts since before the Civil War. They'd talk about strange lights over the ridge, about something they called the Flying Death that the Shawnee used to whisper about around their campfires. Of course, I always figured that was just mountain talk, the kind of ghost stories men tell when they've been underground too long or worked too many double shifts on the river barges. My fiancée, Sarah, teaches 3rd grade down in Point Pleasant proper. We're planning to get married next spring, maybe build a little house closer to town where she won't have to drive so far to work. She's been patient about me spending so much time up here alone, says she understands it's important work. But lately she's been asking me to come down more often, stay overnight at her place instead of sleeping in the tower cabin. Says something about the ridge has been bothering her, making her feel watched when she drives the mountain road. The first sign something was different came on a Tuesday morning in early September. I was up in the tower doing my routine weather check when I heard the radio crackle to life. Pilot from the State Aviation Service doing his weekly forest survey flight. "Tower station, this is Survey Bird 7. You got anything unusual up there on the ridge?" "Over." I keyed the microphone. "-7, clear skies, light wind from the southwest. What's your concern?" "Over." "Had something big cross my flight path about 2 minutes ago. Looked like Hell, I don't know what it looked like. Wings had to be 15, maybe 20 feet across. Too big for any bird I know. Nearly clipped my port wing. Over. I looked out the tower windows, scanning the sky. Nothing but blue September morning and a few turkey vultures riding the thermals. Could it have been a flock of geese? They're starting to migrate. Over. Negative on the geese, Bobby. This was one creature, and it was flying against the wind like it didn't matter. Banking and turning like nothing I've ever seen. Keep your eyes open up there. Survey Bird 7, out. I spent the rest of that day watching the sky, but didn't see anything unusual. Figured maybe the pilot had seen a really big eagle or caught a flock of birds at just the right angle to make them look like one creature. These mountains play tricks on your eyes sometimes, especially when the light's just right. That evening, I climbed down to check the area around the tower base, just to be thorough. That's when I found the marks. In the soft earth near the tower's support legs, clear as day, were impressions that looked like something massive had landed hard and then taken off again. The marks were shaped like enormous bird feet. But wrong somehow. Too long, too sharp, with what looked like claw marks that dug deep into the clay soil. Each print was near 2 feet long, and they were spaced out like whatever made. Them had a wingspan wider than my Jeep. I knelt down next to the clearest print and pulled out my measuring tape. 23 inches from heel to longest claw mark. The toes, if you could call them that, were spread wide like the thing had landed hard and grabbed for purchase before launching itself back into the air. I'd been tracking animals in these woods since I was 10 years old. Knew the difference between deer tracks and dog tracks, between a bear paw and a bobcat print. These didn't match anything in my experience or in any of the wildlife guides I kept in the cabin. As I stood there staring at those impossible tracks, I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. The birds had gone quiet. Not the normal quiet of evening settling in, but the kind of silence that comes when every living thing in the forest suddenly decides to hide. The next few days brought more strangeness than I'd seen in all my 11 years on the ridge. Birds were flying the wrong direction, north instead of south, even though migration season was starting. The few hikers who came through reported their dogs acting spooked, whining and pulling at their leashes like they wanted to get off the mountain as fast as possible. My radio equipment started picking up interference I couldn't explain. Not the usual static from distant CB radios, but something that sounded almost like voices whispering just below the range of clear hearing. I called it into my supervisor, Frank Morrison, down at the district office. Frank's been with the Forestry Service for 30 years and has heard every excuse for equipment problems you can imagine. Bobby, you're probably getting bleed through from those new radio towers they're putting up around Huntington. Give it a few days to settle down. If it keeps up, I'll send a technician up to check your gear. But I knew it wasn't normal radio interference. He whispers, came strongest at dusk, right around the time most animals should be settling in for the night. Instead, I'd watch through the tower windows as deer would suddenly bolt across clearings like something was chasing them, and the coyotes that usually started howling after dark stayed silent. On Thursday night, I got a call that changed everything. Bobby? Sarah's voice sounded small and scared over the phone line. I need you to come down here. Something's been watching my house. I was down the mountain in 20 minutes, my Jeep bouncing over the rutted fire road faster than was probably safe. Found Sarah sitting on her front porch with all the lights on, her neighbor Mrs. Henderson beside her with a shotgun across her knees. It's been there for 2 hours, Sarah said, pointing toward the tree line behind her house. Just standing in the shadow of that big oak, watching the windows. Mrs. Henderson saw it too. The old woman nodded, her weathered hand steady on the gun. Saw plenty of bears and deer in my time, Bobby. This ain't neither one. Stands on 2 legs like a man, but it's too tall and the shape ain't right. And those eyes. What about the eyes? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. They glow red in the dark, like coals in a fire pit. I walked to the edge of the yard with my flashlight, playing the beam across the tree line. Nothing moved in the shadows, but I felt something I'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty that something was looking back at me, studying me. The feeling was so strong it made my hands shake. We called the sheriff, but by the time Deputy Collins arrived, whatever had been watching was gone. He found some broken branches and disturbed leaves, but no clear tracks. Told us to call if it came back and said he'd have his deputies make extra patrols through the area. I stayed with Sarah that night, each of us jumping at every sound outside. Around 3 in the morning, we heard something heavy land on the roof. Footsteps, if you could call them that, walking from one end of the house to the other. When I went outside to look, there were scratch marks in the shingles that hadn't been there before. Long gouges that looked like they'd been made by claws the size of railroad spikes. The next morning, I drove back up the ridge with a sick feeling in my stomach. Whatever was happening, it was connected to my tower somehow. The pilot had seen it near my position, the tracks were around my tower base, and now it was following me down to Sarah's place. I spent that Friday doing research, calling other ranger stations to see if anyone else had reported unusual wildlife sightings. Most of them thought I was joking at first, but Jim Woodbridge over at Cabway-Lingo State Forest had a different reaction. "Bobby, you need to be careful up there," he said, his voice serious. "Had a call from a surveyor last month who swore something the size of a small airplane buzzed his helicopter down in Lincoln County. Pilot nearly crashed trying to avoid it. Said it looked like a giant bat with glowing eyes. You think it's the same thing? I think there's something moving through these mountains that doesn't belong in any textbook, and I think it might be dangerous." That evening, just before sunset, I was up in the tower doing my final check of the day when I saw it. The creature came out of the south, flying low over the trees with a grace that no bird could match. Its wings, and they were definitely wings, stretched wider than any living thing I'd ever seen. The body was dark, almost black, and shaped like a man, but stretched tall and thin. As it passed directly over the tower, no more than 50 feet above me, I got my first clear look at what passed for its head. There wasn't one. Where a neck and head should have been, there was just more of that dark body, and set into what might have been shoulders were 2 enormous eyes that glowed like red spotlights in the Gatha. Ring dusk. The thing circled the tower once, slow and deliberate, and I felt those red eyes fix on me through the glass windows of the observation deck. For maybe 10 seconds, we looked at each other, me frozen with terror, it hanging in the air like something that had never heard of gravity. Then it was gone, shooting off toward the north faster than any aircraft I'd ever seen, leaving me alone with the certain knowledge that everything I thought I understood about the world had just changed forever. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those red lights staring at me through the darkness. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had been some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and too much coffee. But when I climbed down to check around the tower base, I found fresh tracks, dozens of them, like the thing had been walking circles around my station all night long. I called Jim Woodbridge and told him what I'd seen. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Bobby, I'm driving up there. Don't go anywhere." Jim arrived around noon with Dr. Karen Mills, a wildlife biologist from the State University. She was a small woman with serious eyes who listened to my story without interrupting, then asked to see the tracks. "These are unlike anything in the literature," she said, kneeling beside the clearest print with a camera. "The stride length suggests something 7 to 8 feet tall, but the foot structure, it's almost like a cross between a bird of prey and a human foot." "So, what do you think it is?" I asked. She stood up and brushed the dirt off her knees. "I think you've encountered something that shouldn't exist, but the evidence suggests it does." We spent the afternoon setting up motion-activated cameras around the tower and in the woods nearby. Dr. Mills had brought equipment that could detect heat signatures and records ones outside the normal human hearing range. If the creature came back, we'd have proof. It came back that very night. I was in the cabin with Jim and Dr. Mills when the first camera triggered. The motion detector alarm went off at exactly 11:17 p.m., followed by 2 more cameras in quick succession. We could track the thing's path through the forest by the sequence of alarms, moving faster than any animal should be able to travel through thick woods in complete darkness. "It's heading for the tower," Dr. Mills whispered, watching the readouts on her equipment. The heat signature detector went crazy, showing something massive moving up the tower structure. Through the cabin window, we could see a dark shape silhouetted against the stars, perched on the observation deck like it owned the place. "I need to get closer," Dr. Mills said, reaching for her camera. "This could be the discovery of the century." Jim grabbed her arm. "Karen, that's not some new species of bird. That thing is dangerous." She shook him off. "This is what I came here for." She was out the cabin door before either of us could stop her. Jim and I followed, staying back but keeping her in sight as she approached the tower. The creature, it was definitely the same thing I'd seen before, turned those red eyes toward us, but didn't move from its perch. Dr. Mills got within 30 feet of the tower base and started taking pictures, the camera flash strobing through the darkness. That's when everything went wrong. The creature dropped from the tower like a stone, landing between Dr. Mills and us with a sound like thunder. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. 7 feet tall, covered in what looked like black feathers or fur, with arms that ended in claws longer than kitchen knives. Dr. Mills screamed and tried to run, but the thing moved faster than anything that size had a right to. One of those massive clawed hands swept across her back, sending her sprawling into the underbrush. The camera went flying, smashing against a tree trunk. Jim had a rifle. He'd hid it in case we ran into a bear, and he got off 2 quick shots. Both bullets hit center mass, but the creature didn't even slow down. It turned toward us, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. There was no face, just smooth darkness where features should have been, and those 2 red eyes burning like coals. But somehow, I knew it was looking directly at me, studying me, like it had been doing this whole time. Then it was gone, launching itself into the air with a sound like wind rushing through a cave. One moment it was there, the next it had vanished into the night sky. We found Dr. Mills unconscious but alive, 3 deep gashes across her back that needed 20 stitches at the hospital in Point Pleasant. She kept saying the same thing over and over while they worked on her. It wasn't trying to kill me, it was trying to warn me. The sheriff's department wrote it up as a bear attack, despite the claw marks being all wrong for any bear. Dr. Mills didn't argue with the official report, but she pulled me aside before she left town. "That creature, it's been reported in other places, always before disasters. Bridge collapses, mine accidents, floods. People call it the Mothman." "You think it causes disasters?" She shook her head. "I think it sees them coming. And I think it's trying to warn people, but we're too scared to listen." 2 days later, Jim Woodbridge had a massive heart attack while doing his evening rounds. The other rangers found him the next morning slumped over his truck's steering wheel. He was 42 years old and had never had heart problems before. But the strangest part was what they found clutched in his hand, a single black feather, 2 feet long and unlike anything any ornithologist could identify. The thing in the woods wasn't just watching anymore, it was getting closer. After Jim's funeral, I went back up to the ridge with a different understanding of what I was dealing with. I'd done some research at the Point Pleasant Library, digging through old newspapers and local history books. What I found made my blood run cold. The Shawnee had stories about the Flying Death, a creature with burning eyes that appeared before great tragedies befell their people. River workers in the 1920s reported seeing a giant birdman in the weeks before the Great Flood of 1924 that killed 17 people. Coal miners had whispered about red eyes in the darkness before the mine collapse of 1943. But the most chilling discovery was in a journal kept by a Civil War soldier stationed at Point Pleasant. He wrote about sentries reporting a winged demon that watched their camp from the ridge in the days leading up to a Confederate raid that nearly wiped out their regiment. The pattern was always the same. The creature appeared, people dismissed it as superstition or hallucination, and then disaster struck. I was sitting in the tower that night trying to piece together what it all meant when the radio crackled to life. But instead of normal traffic from the Forestry Service, I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. A voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves, speaking words I could somehow understand, even though they weren't in any language I knew. Bobby Silverton, you need to listen. Time is short. I keyed the microphone with shaking hands. Who is this? How do you know my name? Look toward the river. See what comes. Against my better judgment, I turned my binoculars toward the Ohio River Valley. In the darkness, I could make out the lights of Point Pleasant, the glow of street lamps reflecting off the water. Everything looked normal, peaceful. Then the vision hit me. Suddenly, I wasn't in the tower anymore. I was standing on the silver bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, watching cars drive back and forth in the winter darkness. The bridge was packed with evening commuters heading home for Christmas shopping, families with children, couples on their way to den. Near. And then the bridge was falling. The roadway twisted like a snake, concrete and steel screaming as they tore apart. Cars tumbled into the dark water below, their headlights disappearing beneath the surface like dying stars. I could hear people screaming, calling for help that wouldn't come in time. The vision ended as suddenly as it had started, leaving me gasping on the tower floor. When I looked up, the creature was there, perched on the railing outside the observation windows, its red eyes fixed on mine. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid. I understood. You're trying to warn us, I said aloud. The bridge is going to fall. The creature's eyes pulsed brighter, and I felt something touch the edge of my mind. Not words, but concepts, images, emotions. December. Ice on the cables. Metal fatigue. 46 will die unless someone listens. Why me? I asked. Why are you showing me this? You watch. You protect. You understand the responsibility. I stared into those burning eyes, and suddenly I knew what I had to do, and what it would cost me. If I reported this vision, told people the Silver Bridge was going to collapse, who would believe me? A forest ranger claiming he'd been warned by a monster that shouldn't exist? They'd think I'd lost my mind. I'd lose my job, my reputation, maybe my fiancée. But if I stayed silent, 46 people would die. The creature spread its massive wings, preparing to leave. But before it launched itself into the night, I felt one last message touch my mind. Choose carefully, Bobby Silverton. Some warnings only come once. Then it was gone, leaving me alone in the tower with the weight of impossible knowledge. I sat there until dawn, trying to figure out what to do. I could call the authorities, tell them about structural problems I'd observed from the tower, but without evidence, without a rational explanation for why I was suddenly concerned about a bridge I had no reason to be watching, it would sound crazy. In the end, I made the only choice I could live with. I wrote everything down. Every detail of my encounters with the Mothman, every vision, every warning. I sealed the report in an envelope and put it in the tower's log files, to be found after whatever was coming had happened. Then I called Frank Morrison and requested an emergency transfer to a different district. Told him I'd had a family emergency and needed to be closer to Charleston. He wasn't happy about it, but he approved the transfer. 3 days later, I packed up my belongings and drove down Point Pleasant Ridge for what I thought would be the last time. I was working the Seneca State Forest when the Silver Bridge collapsed on December 15, 1967. Exactly as I'd seen in the vision, it happened during evening rush hour, cars full of people heading home for the holidays. The final death toll was 46, just as the creature had shown me. I kept my mouth shut about what I knew. Who would have believed me? And what good would it have done to say I'd been warned by a monster? But I couldn't forget, and I couldn't let it happen again. I left the Forestry Service 6 months later and took a job with the State Emergency Management Agency. Spent the next 30 years developing disaster preparedness plans, early warning systems, structural inspection protocols. Never mentioned the real reason I'd gotten so passionate about preventing catastrophes. Sarah and I got married as planned, had 3 kids, lived a good life. She never knew why I sometimes woke up in the middle of the night staring out the bedroom window at the dark sky, or why I kept newspaper clippings about bridge inspections and building collapses in a folder in my desk drawer. I saw the Mothman one more time, 15 years later, perched on a water tower outside Huntington the night before a chemical plant explosion that could have killed hundreds if the wind had been blowing the wrong direction. This time, I was ready. I had the anonymous calls to the fire department about suspicious activity at the plant, enough to get them to check the facility and discover the gas leak before it became deadly. The creature and I looked at each other across the distance, and I felt something that might have been approval touch the edge of my mind before it vanished into the night. I'm retired now, living in a little house in Charleston with Sarah. She thinks I volunteer with the emergency management folks because I want to stay busy. She doesn't know I'm really waiting for the next warning, the next chance to save lives that someone else might miss. Because here's what I learned during those months on Point Pleasant Ridge. There are things in this world that exist outside our understanding, and not all of them are evil. Some are trying to help in the only way they know how. The Mothman isn't a monster. It's a guardian showing up when disaster threatens to give us a chance to prevent it. But we have to be willing to listen to warnings that come in forms we don't expect. We have to be ready to act on knowledge we can't explain. And sometimes, we have to be willing to sacrifice our own certainty about how the world works to save the lives of people who will never know they were in danger. The Mothman is still out there, still watching, still warning, and I'm still listening, waiting for those red eyes to appear in the darkness, hoping that next time, more people will pay attention before it's too late. Some things don't come to hurt us, they come to warn us, but we're usually too scared to listen. I wasn't too scared, not anymore, and that's made all the difference.